Most people think skipping dinner is a small choice, maybe even a harmless one. You eat breakfast, you eat lunch, and then one night you decide to stop there. No meal in the evening, no late snack, no calories before bed. On the surface, it feels simple, but inside your body, it does not feel small at all, because dinner is not just food. In the modern body, dinner is a signal. It tells your hormones when to rise, your digestive system when to work, your blood sugar when to expect incoming fuel, and your brain when to receive one more round of reward. So when dinner suddenly disappears, your body notices immediately. The first thing that changes is not fat burning, it is expectation. Your body has learned your routine. If you usually eat at night, your brain and hormones begin preparing for food before you even take the first bite. That means when dinner does not arrive, the body experiences a mismatch between what it predicted and what actually happens. This is why the first night of skipping dinner often feels more uncomfortable than it should. Not because your body is in danger, but because your biology is confronting a broken pattern. Within hours, insulin begins to fall earlier than usual. That matters because insulin is the hormone that helps move glucose out of the blood and into cells after you eat. When dinner is absent, there is no large evening rise in insulin, and that changes the entire metabolic tone of the night. Instead of staying in feeding mode, your body begins moving sooner into fasting mode. This is the first meaningful shift. The body starts transitioning away from storing energy and toward managing the fuel you already have. That fuel comes first from glycogen. Glycogen is stored carbohydrate, mostly in the liver, and it acts like a short-term backup battery. If food stops coming in, the liver steps in quietly and releases glucose to keep blood sugar stable. This is why most healthy adults do not become weak or confused just because they skipped one dinner. The body is prepared for this. It has systems designed specifically for the hours when food is not available. But here is where the psychological battle begins. What many people call hunger on the first night is often only partly true hunger. A large part of it is habit. It is timing. It is dopamine. It is the learned emotional comfort of ending the day with food. Your stomach may feel emptier, but the stronger signal often comes from the brain. The brain remembers that evening eating usually brings pleasure, relaxation, and closure. Remove that ritual, and the absence can feel strangely personal. You are not just missing calories, you are interrupting a behavior loop. This is why the first night can feel mentally loud. You may think about food more than usual. Cravings may seem stronger at the exact hour you normally eat, but this does not mean your body is failing. It means your body is adapting. Hunger is not always an emergency. Sometimes it is just a scheduled message from an old routine. As the night goes on, another important shift begins. Because insulin is lower, the body gets a little more freedom to access stored energy. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to begin nudging metabolism in a different direction. This is the earliest stage of metabolic flexibility, the ability to switch between incoming food and stored fuel. Most people in modern eating patterns spend very little time here. They eat, snack, eat again, and keep insulin elevated for most of the day. As a result, the body gets very good at using incoming calories and less efficient at reaching into storage. Skipping dinner interrupts that cycle. And that interruption matters more than most people realize. Because when the evening meal disappears, digestion also slows down earlier. Your stomach empties. Your pancreas has less work to do. Your liver can focus less on processing a new meal and more on regulating what is already in circulation. Even sleep can begin to shift. A late meal often keeps body temperature and digestion elevated into the night. Remove that meal, and many people find that the body begins preparing for sleep in a cleaner, quieter way. This does not mean the first night feels easy. For many people it does not. You may feel restless, slightly cold, more aware of your body than usual. But beneath that discomfort, something important is happening. Your system is remembering that it was built for gaps between meals. Human metabolism was never designed to require constant feeding. It was designed to handle cycles, eating and resting, storing and releasing, feeding and fasting. So the real story of the first skipped dinner is not that your body starts suffering. It is that your body starts recalculating. Hormones shift. Blood sugar is stabilized from internal reserves. Digestive demand drops, the brain protests the broken routine, and metabolism takes the first small step away from dependence and toward flexibility. That is why the first night matters. Not because one missed dinner transforms your body instantly, but because it begins the switch. And if you repeat that choice night after night, the question is no longer whether dinner is missing. The question becomes what your body starts doing in response. By the second day of skipping dinner, the body begins moving past the initial shock of a broken routine. The first night was mostly psychological. Your brain noticed the missing meal and reacted to the absence of a familiar pattern. But the second day is where metabolism begins to engage more seriously. The key player at this stage is glycogen. As mentioned earlier, glycogen is the body's short-term energy reserve, stored primarily in the liver. During the first night without dinner, your liver releases glycogen to keep blood sugar stable, but glycogen is limited. Most adults store enough to support normal blood glucose for about a day, sometimes slightly longer depending on activity levels. By the time the second evening arrives without dinner, that reserve has already begun shrinking. This does not mean the body is running out of energy. Far from it. What it means is that the body is preparing to switch energy systems. Humans carry a remarkable amount of stored fuel in the form of body fat. Even relatively lean individuals may have tens of thousands of calories stored in adipose tissue. From an evolutionary perspective, this storage exists specifically to protect us during periods when food is not immediately available. So when glycogen begins to decline, the body does not panic. Instead, it begins quietly unlocking this larger energy reserve. Fat cells start releasing fatty acids into the bloodstream. Muscles and other tissues begin using those fatty acids as fuel. At the same time, the liver begins converting some of these fatty acids into molecules called ketones. This transition is known as the metabolic switch. The metabolic switch marks the moment when the body gradually shifts from relying mostly on glucose to relying increasingly on fat-derived fuel. It does not happen instantly. It unfolds over hours and days as insulin stays lower and stored energy becomes more accessible. For many people, the second or third evening of skipping dinner is where something surprising happens. Hunger begins behaving differently. During the first night, hunger tends to appear exactly when your normal dinner time arrives. This is because of a hormone called ghrelin. Ghrelin is often called the hunger hormone, but its behavior is more interesting than most people realize. Ghrelin does not simply rise continuously the longer you go without food. Instead, it follows patterns based on your eating schedule. If you normally eat dinner at 7 p.m., ghrelin rises around that time because your body expects food. But if you skip dinner and wait, ghrelin usually falls again within about an hour. In other words, hunger comes in waves, and those waves often pass even if you do not eat. This is one of the most important realizations people experience during the early days of skipping dinner. The feeling of hunger is not always a signal that the body is in danger. Often it is just a signal that the body expected something to happen at a certain time. Once that expectation fades, the hunger fades with it. Meanwhile, something else is happening beneath the surface. Because insulin remains lower during the evening hours, the body becomes slightly more efficient at accessing stored energy. This does not mean dramatic fat loss begins immediately, but it does mean the metabolic environment is shifting away from constant storage. For people who eat late dinners every night, insulin often remains elevated until close to bedtime. This can keep the body in a fed state long after the meal ends. Skipping dinner shortens that feeding window, and that longer fasting window gives metabolism time to operate differently. Instead of constantly processing new incoming calories, the body begins balancing its internal fuel supply. Another change begins to appear in the brain. As fatty acids increase and small amounts of ketones begin circulating, the brain slowly starts adapting to this alternative fuel. Initially, this adaptation can feel slightly uncomfortable. Some people report mild fatigue or mental sluggishness during the first couple of days. But this phase is temporary. Once ketone production rises enough to supplement brain energy needs, many people notice that their mental state stabilizes again. Instead of the familiar cycle of energy spikes and crashes that follow large meals, energy begins to feel more even. Focus becomes steadier. Mood becomes calmer. This is not because skipping dinner is magically energizing. It is because the body is beginning to rely less on rapid glucose swings and more on steady internal fuel. And another subtle change begins to appear during this stage. Your relationship with food starts shifting. During the first night, skipping dinner feels like resisting something. It feels like denying the body what it expects. But by the second or third day, many people begin realizing that the body is more resilient than they assumed. Missing one evening meal does not make you weaker. It simply changes how the body chooses to use energy. This realization can be surprisingly powerful, because for the first time, many people experience the difference between habitual eating and true physiological hunger. Habitual eating happens because it is time to eat. True hunger happens because the body genuinely needs fuel. And when dinner disappears for a few nights in a row, those two signals begin separating. Your body continues adapting quietly. Glycogen levels stabilize at lower evening levels. Fat metabolism increases slightly. Hormones begin adjusting to the new schedule. But the most interesting changes are still ahead. Because if skipping dinner continues beyond the third or fourth day, metabolism begins activating deeper repair processes inside the body. Processes that have less to do with hunger and more to do with cellular health. And that is where the story becomes far more interesting. By the fourth day of skipping dinner, something important begins to change. The internal resistance fades. During the first few days, the body and brain were negotiating with each other. Your brain expected food at night. Your metabolism was still adjusting to longer fasting periods. But by day 4, that negotiation starts ending. The body begins accepting the new rhythm. One of the biggest shifts at this stage involves fuel. During the first couple of days, glycogen was still helping stabilize blood sugar. But by now, glycogen reserves are no longer the main source of evening energy. The body has started leaning much more heavily on fat. Fat cells release fatty acids into the bloodstream, and the liver converts some of those fatty acids into ketones. These ketones begin circulating through the blood and eventually reach the brain. And that is where one of the most interesting changes happens. For most of modern history, people believed the brain could only run on glucose. But that idea turned out to be incomplete. The brain is actually very capable of running on ketones as well. In fact, during periods of fasting, ketones can provide a remarkably stable source of fuel for brain cells. That stability is important. Glucose-based energy tends to rise and fall depending on meals. Eat a large meal, blood sugar rises. A few hours later, it drops again. That cycle repeats throughout the day. Ketones behave differently. They enter the bloodstream gradually and provide a more steady energy supply. For many people, this is the stage where mental clarity begins improving. Not dramatically, not overnight, but noticeably. Focus becomes easier. Energy feels smoother. The sharp hunger spikes from earlier days begin fading. Part of this happens because another hormone rhythm has begun adjusting. Earlier in the week, ghrelin spikes were still appearing at the usual dinner hour. But by day 4 or 5, the body stops expecting that meal. The ghrelin wave becomes weaker. That is why many people report something surprising around this stage. Evenings become quieter. The intense hunger from the first few nights fades into something softer. Instead of feeling like the body is demanding food, it begins feeling like the body simply moved on. But the most important change happening during this stage is not hunger. It is repair. When food intake drops for long enough periods, the body begins activating a cellular process known as autophagy. Autophagy literally means self-eating, but the term can be misleading. The process is not destructive, it is more like cellular recycling. Inside every cell are proteins and structures that perform important functions. Over time, some of these components become damaged or inefficient. Normally, cells continue working while these broken pieces accumulate. Autophagy helps clean that up. During fasting periods, the body begins identifying damaged cellular material, breaking it down, and recycling the useful components. The process helps improve cellular efficiency and remove molecular debris. This discovery was considered so important that the research behind autophagy earned the 2016 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. Skipping dinner every night does not trigger the same level of autophagy as prolonged multi-day fasting, but extending the fasting window each day can still encourage mild activation of these repair pathways. In simple terms, when the body is not constantly digesting new food, it has more time to repair itself. Another system that begins benefiting from this change is digestion. For most people, the digestive system works nearly all day long. Breakfast arrives, lunch follows, dinner appears a few hours later. In between, snacks often keep digestion active. Removing dinner shortens that cycle. The digestive system now gets a longer rest every night. The stomach empties earlier. The pancreas releases less insulin. The liver has fewer nutrients to process late in the evening. This shift may sound small, but it changes how the body allocates energy. When digestion slows down earlier in the night, the body can redirect resources toward maintenance instead of constant processing. Many people notice subtle improvements during this stage. Bloating decreases. Sleep becomes deeper. Energy during the next morning feels more stable. Even circadian rhythm begins responding. The body's internal clock evolved around a simple pattern. Eat during daylight, rest during darkness. Modern eating patterns often push calories late into the night, which can disrupt that rhythm. Skipping dinner moves eating earlier in the day again. That alignment may help melatonin rise more naturally at night and support deeper sleep cycles. By day 5 or 6, the body is no longer experimenting with this new schedule. It is adapting to it. Fat metabolism becomes more active. Evening hunger becomes weaker. Hormones begin stabilizing around the new routine. And perhaps the most important shift is psychological. The fear of hunger begins disappearing. You realize something simple but powerful. The body is far more capable than it first appears. Missing dinner does not make the body weaker. It simply reminds the body how to use the energy it already has. And, as the first week comes to an end, the metabolism begins entering a much deeper stage of adaptation. Because once the body accepts this rhythm, something even more interesting begins happening inside your cells. The engines that power your metabolism start upgrading. By the time you reach the end of the first week without dinner, something subtle but powerful has happened inside your body. What started as an experiment has turned into a metabolic pattern. Your body is no longer reacting to the absence of the evening meal. It is reorganizing around it. One of the biggest changes during this stage involves how your cells produce energy. Inside, nearly every cell in your body are tiny structures called mitochondria. These structures act like microscopic power plants. Their job is to convert nutrients into usable energy that powers everything you do: movement, thinking, healing, and even breathing. For most people living in modern eating patterns, mitochondria spend most of their time processing glucose from frequent meals. But when dinner disappears for several days in a row, something different begins to happen. The body starts relying more consistently on stored fat. Fatty acids flow into the bloodstream more often, and the liver continues producing ketones during the longer overnight fasting period. This change forces the mitochondria to become better at using fat as fuel. And when mitochondria are challenged in this way, they adapt. Research shows that periods of metabolic stress, such as fasting, can stimulate a process called mitochondrial biogenesis. This simply means the body begins producing more mitochondria. More mitochondria means greater energy capacity. Instead of running on a small number of energy engines, your cells begin building more of them. This can improve how efficiently the body converts fuel into usable energy. For many people, this is the stage where daily energy begins feeling noticeably different. Not necessarily higher, but steadier. Instead of the familiar pattern of feeling energized after meals and sluggish a few hours later, energy becomes smoother throughout the day. This happens because the body is no longer depending entirely on the timing of incoming calories. It has learned to draw from internal fuel when necessary. Another important shift happening during this stage involves insulin sensitivity. Earlier in the process, skipping dinner lowered evening insulin levels. Now, after a full week of consistent fasting windows, the body often becomes more responsive to insulin when food does arrive. This means when you eat during the day, your cells can absorb glucose more efficiently. In practical terms, this can help prevent the large spikes and crashes in blood sugar that many people experience after meals. Instead of storing excess glucose quickly as fat, the body becomes better at directing it toward immediate energy use. This improvement in insulin sensitivity is one of the reasons intermittent fasting has been widely studied in relation to metabolic health. It does not mean skipping dinner alone cures metabolic disease, but it does demonstrate how meal timing can influence how the body manages fuel. During this stage, hormones involved in appetite regulation also continue adjusting. Earlier in the experiment, ghrelin waves still appeared around the usual dinner hour. But after a week without that meal, the body's hunger clock begins resetting. Evening hunger becomes much weaker. Instead of feeling like something is missing, the body begins accepting the earlier eating window as the new normal. At the same time, another hormone called leptin becomes more relevant. Leptin is responsible for signaling long-term energy balance. It tells the brain how much stored energy the body has available. When metabolic patterns stabilize, leptin signaling can improve, helping the brain regulate appetite more accurately. In simple terms, hunger becomes less chaotic. You begin feeling hungry when the body truly needs fuel, not simply because a habit has been triggered. Another system quietly improving during this period is the digestive system. With dinner removed, digestion finishes earlier in the evening. The stomach empties sooner, insulin drops earlier at night, and the liver gains several additional hours without needing to process incoming food. This matters because the liver is responsible for hundreds of metabolic tasks. It regulates blood sugar, processes nutrients, manages cholesterol production, and helps detoxify various substances in the body. When the liver is not constantly processing late-night meals, it can devote more resources to maintaining metabolic balance. Sleep can also change during this stage. Late-night eating often interferes with the body's circadian rhythm. Digestion raises body temperature and keeps metabolic pathways active when the body should be preparing for rest. Removing dinner helps shift metabolism earlier in the day. As a result, melatonin, the hormone that signals sleep, may rise more naturally in the evening. Many people notice they fall asleep faster and wake up feeling clearer the next morning. By day 10, the body has largely accepted the new metabolic rhythm. Fat metabolism is more active than before. Evening hunger is weaker. Energy is steadier. Hormones are stabilizing around the new eating pattern. But perhaps the most important change during this stage is something psychological: confidence. During the first few days, skipping dinner felt uncertain. The body seemed unpredictable. Hunger felt intimidating. Now that uncertainty fades. You begin realizing that the body is not fragile, it is adaptable. And when the body adapts, it often becomes more efficient. But the story of skipping dinner for 2 weeks is not finished yet. Because the final days of this experiment reveal something deeper, not just about metabolism, but about how the body restores balance when given enough time between meals. By the second week of skipping dinner, the body is no longer adapting. It has already adapted. What you begin seeing now are the results of that adaptation. The most important change is not dramatic weight loss or extreme fat burning. Those are often exaggerated in online discussions about fasting. The real change is metabolic stability. For many people, energy throughout the day becomes more predictable. Instead of rising and crashing with each meal, energy feels smoother. Hunger becomes less aggressive. And the body begins operating with a rhythm that feels calmer. One reason for this stability involves the gut. Your digestive system is home to trillions of microorganisms known collectively as the gut microbiome. These bacteria play a major role in digestion, immune regulation, and even mood, but they are also heavily influenced by when and how often you eat. Constant eating means constant digestion. When dinner disappears, the digestive system gains several additional hours of rest every night. That extended break allows the gut lining to repair itself and gives microbial populations time to rebalance. Research suggests that fasting windows can encourage the growth of beneficial bacteria while reducing strains associated with inflammation. This does not happen overnight, but after several days of consistent fasting periods, many people begin noticing digestive changes. The stomach feels lighter, bloating decreases, and digestion during the daytime meals may become more efficient. Another important shift during the second week involves inflammation. Modern eating patterns often keep the body in a constant fed state. Frequent spikes in blood sugar and insulin can promote low-grade chronic inflammation over time. Extending the nightly fasting window may help interrupt that cycle. When insulin stays lower for longer periods, inflammatory signaling pathways in the body can begin to quiet down. Some studies have observed reductions in markers such as C-reactive protein in individuals practicing intermittent fasting routines. Lower inflammation does not produce dramatic sensations, but it can subtly improve how the body feels. Joints may feel less stiff, skin may appear clearer, and recovery from physical activity may improve. But the most interesting change during this stage may not be biological at all. It may be psychological. After nearly 2 weeks without dinner, something simple becomes obvious. Hunger is not always what it seems. During the first few nights, hunger felt intense and urgent. It appeared exactly when dinner normally happened, and it seemed to demand immediate attention. But over time, those signals weakened. You discovered that hunger often behaves more like a wave than a warning. It rises, peaks, and then fades even if you do not eat. This realization changes how many people think about food. Instead of reacting automatically to every hunger signal, they begin observing it. Is this true hunger? Or is this simply habit? That distinction can be surprisingly powerful, because modern eating habits often blur the line between physical need and behavioral routine. Skipping dinner for 2 weeks does not mean you must avoid evening meals forever. It does not mean everyone should adopt the same eating schedule. But it does demonstrate something important about human metabolism. The body is far more flexible than most people assume. It can function well without constant feeding. It can access stored energy when needed. And it can restore balance when given enough time between meals. This is the real lesson of the 4-day experiment. Not that skipping dinner is a miracle strategy, but that the human body was designed for cycles, not constant consumption. For most of human history, food availability was unpredictable. Meals were separated by long periods of activity and rest. The body evolved to handle those gaps efficiently. Modern life often removes those gaps. We eat early, eat late, snack in between, and rarely give metabolism time to pause. Skipping dinner simply restores one of those pauses. And sometimes, that pause is exactly what the body needs. So, after 14 nights without dinner, the real question is not whether you survived it. Of course you did. The real question is what you learned about your body along the way. Because once you understand how adaptable metabolism really is, eating becomes less about constant urgency and more about intentional rhythm. And that rhythm may be one of the most powerful tools for long-term health.